When one advances claims, one must first establish a standard of assessment. To make claims in the absence of such a standard is like trying to establish on the surface of a spinning potter's wheel where the sun will rise and set. Without a fixed standard, one cannot clearly discern what is right and wrong, or what is beneficial and harmful. Standards are a tool to differentiate what is acceptable and what is not, and knowing what one wants and what one doesn't want allows one to achieve the goal that one wants. For Mozi, this means that having a standard for the society allows the individual to know what is the right action that one should perform to receive the benefits of one's action and avoid what is harmful to oneself. He illustrated this point in the book of Mozi in the following statement. We must first set up a standard of judgment. Therefore, a theory must be judged by 3 tests. What are these 3 tests of a theory? Its origin, its validity, and its applicability. How do we judge its origin? We judge it by comparing the theory with the deeds of the sage kings of antiquity. How do we judge its validity? We judge it by comparing the theory with the evidence of the eyes and ears of the people. And how do we judge its applicability? We judge it by observing whether, when the theory is put into practice in the administration, it brings benefits to the state and the people. This is what is meant by the 3 tests of a theory. In the last lecture, we briefly went over Confucianism and discussed Confucius' aim to reform society. In this lecture, I will be discussing Mozi's background and his responses to Confucius' approach to political and social reform, as well as exploring some of his positions on how he will go about reforming the society. Mozi is the founder of the mohism movement, the first major alternative philosophical and social movement. He lived during the 5th century BCE, but we don't know much about his life. However, we know that he was a student at the Confucian Academy, but turned away from their teachings. Like Aristotle to Plato, who was a student at the academy, that later developed his own philosophy to refute some of his master's teachings. Mozi also developed his own thoughts and adopted a critical attitude toward Confucians and their philosophical approaches. He and his followers, the mohists, describe them as indolent and arrogant, self-indulgent in drinking and eating, and too lazy to work. He often suffers from hunger and cold and is in danger of freezing and starvation, but lacks the ability to avert them. He behaves like a beggar, grabs food like a hamster, stares blankly like a goat, and rises up like a pig. When the gentlemen all laugh at him, he becomes angry and exclaims, "What do these undisciplined men know about a good Confucian like me?" In spring and summer, he begs for grain. When the 5 grains are gathered, he resorts to conducting funeral. When a death takes place in a rich family, he will rejoice greatly, for it is his opportunity for clothing and food. Despite his critical attitude toward his former scholars and teachers, he shared the same goals with Confucians: to alleviate social ills, restore worldly order, and promote welfare for the people. Unlike Confucius' supporters, who were mainly the intellectual elites of society, Mozi's supporters primarily came from that of the working class. Before I move on to talk more about him, it must be noted that, like Confucius, Mozi also did not write down any of his ideas, so it must be remembered that his remarks were most likely recorded by his students. So when we're learning about mohism, this fact must be kept in mind. For Mozi, the attitude that people have toward oneself and to another, particularly the attitude that human nature consists of love toward oneself and for one's family, is an attitude that plagues society and is the root of all problems. He reasons that people tend to take actions that benefit themselves in detriment to society. Hence, Mozi condemned the Confucian doctrine of love with distinctions as a form of partiality, and instead advocated universal love in its place, in which people would love one another equally and benefit each other mutually, regardless of one's ties toward another human being. As he stated, regard others' countries as if they were my own country, regard others' families as if they were my own family, regard others' bodies as if they were my own body. This position starkly contrasts the Confucians' ideal society, in which a pious individual takes care of one's family and relatives and friends first before strangers. Their normative order is established in a ritual structure in which each of the power holders is to be good in a Confucian sense. What it means to be a good person means is to take full responsibility that is required for the position in the ritual structure. However, in a mohist society, their normative order is established in a hierarchical structure in which a person is supposed to do good. To do good is to serve the interests of everyone. This form of doing good follows what heaven does, which is serving the most general interest in the world. But how do we know that heaven's interest is based on love that benefits everyone? He answers this question by first reflecting on the origin of the state, as he explains. In ancient times, when the people were first engendered at a time when there was no government, it is said that men all had their own views of what was right. Every man affirmed his own view and negated the views of others. Hence, in their intercourse, there was constant strife. The disorder in the world was like that of birds and beasts. It was then understood that the cause of the disorder in the world was the lack of a capable ruler. Once a ruler was selected, since his strength was insufficient, there was again a selection of the wisest and most capable, and they were appointed as the 3 ministers. In other words, during the pre-civilization era, when there was no government and people lived in small groups, there was constant warfare and death. One's view of what was right was simply one serving one's own individual interest. From this account, it was evident to him that the sacred ties of the family, rooted in ancestor worship, which was touted by Confucius, did not stop the wars. Because it could not stop the wars, he rejected Li, one of the integral components of Confucianism. He did not believe that goodness simply existed in individuals. Therefore, the good does not exist. To be good is to achieve it through actions. However, actions that are carried out toward maximizing benefits cannot simply be for one's benefit when each of the men in the hierarchical structure is supposed to have universal love in their hearts. Thus, when dealing with the common good of the society, one must first begin with the general interest of the whole society and regard all particular interests only from the point of the view of the whole society. This can be done only when one is in a situation where everyone approves of what is approved by the ruler and everyone rejects what is rejected by the ruler. The ruler then must submit himself to heaven and strives for the common good. In mohist society, heaven is the center of guidance for society, since heaven is omnibenevolent and omnipresent. Because the sage kings adopt heaven as their standard of good and righteousness, all their actions were effective. Because heaven is omnibenevolent and omnipresent, it can be assumed that heaven's interest is in serving the well-being of the whole world rather than the welfare of the individual. A particular interest derives from the general interest. Thus, when the general interest of mankind is served, the particular interest will get served afterward. Like Plato, who advocated for a society in which one does not know one's kin and everyone lives in a community sharing certain property, Mozi also believed in this ideal world in which, in order to achieve it and avert social order and avert social disorder, everyone must renounce family relations and dispose of self-interest attitude and avoid selfish behavior. As we can see from his approach to religion, he takes a more pragmatic approach to construct a social order than Confucius, who simply endorses rites and rituals, which are largely formalistic and impractical, according to Mozi. He advocated reverence for the will of heaven, not from the position of superstitions, but from the utility view of the religions that these benefits would help promote universal benefit. Likewise, he argued against the existence of fate and the belief in destiny because he thought that such beliefs would be detrimental to social welfare if people start to feel like there is nothing that one can do to change our lives. Furthermore, unlike the Confucians, who emphasize citizens to put in the effort to learn musical instruments, Mozi viewed it as something that wastes our time and energy, as well as something that can be used to justify discrimination against other members of the social class. He'd rather have a modest society in which people spend time learning how to farm, weave, and practice governance, resulting in a materially sustained society. He denounces anything that does not fulfill our basic needs as extravagant and aims to establish a society that has no luxury, no sophistication, and no waste. In other words, what he was promoting is what the people in the modern Western society called minimalist lifestyle. The importance of mohist in Chinese philosophy was their pioneering of using thought experiments and state of nature arguments in an argument to refute another position. For example, when arguing for the position of impartial love as opposed to filial piety, They evoke a scenario in which we are in the position of a warrior who will be on a dangerous mission, and we must leave our families to someone whom we can entrust their well-being with. For him, it is more rational to leave our loved ones towards someone who possesses impartial love rather than someone who possesses pious love, even the ones who may be our relatives or close friends, since we can know for sure that someone with impartial love would treat our loved ones as their own rather than to someone who will not give equal treatment to our loved ones, since they must take care of someone whom they are duty-bound to take care of. Mohists, in their effort to find a clear, quantifiable standard for ethical evaluation in the consequences of actions, has some similarities to Western utilitarianism. However, in its reverence for heaven and confidence in the agency of ghosts and spirits, it is reminiscent of theology. Although the school of Mohism was the dominant school along with Confucianism, 2 to 3 centuries later, Mohism died out as an independent philosophical movement at the end of the Warring States period. This transition probably happened when the Han Dynasty consolidated, and as people whose concern was no longer just about survival, its appeal went away. However, its influence can be seen in other schools of philosophy in their use of argumentative techniques. Also, despite its lack of appreciation in later dynasties, Mohism was much appreciated by many 20th century Chinese philosophers, particularly in the New Culture movement, who sought an alternative to Confucianism. Many contemporary students of Asian philosophy are also attracted to his message of universal love and his approach to building a utopia where everyone can coexist without any hostility and where no starvation or lack of any resources exist. We will wrap up this lecture by leaving with a quote that demonstrates what exactly attracts people who studies his philosophy. Universal love is really the way of the sage kings. It is what gives peace to the rulers and sustenance to the people.